Hello,
Hi,
everyone. Hi.
good to see you.
Hi,
Happy New
Michael.
Year.
Hello, good to be here.
Yes, yes. So I want to welcome Dr. Michael Acton to Talking Back to Suicide. And Michael and we met right through the Mental Health Academy,
We did.
right? Where I was listening, watching one of your presentations, and I was so impressed that I reached out to you. All right. And then you were working on your book, which you'll tell us about, Weathering Relationships. And I ended up contributing to a chapter that you had done on suicide, particularly related to relationships.
Yes.
So, Michael, could you, I don't know, kind of jump right in and talk about yourself, your background, your interest in psychology,
Sure.
suicide prevention, whatever, your life?
No problem. So yes, so I lecture worldwide. I've been a clinical practitioner for 31 years now. So a lot of experience under my belt. I've learned mostly from the amazing patients that have come through my doors. They've taught me so much over the years about their own coping mechanisms, vulnerabilities, etc. To the point of not so long ago, a few years ago, that they brought my attention to my own vulnerabilities in my own life, and I then went on to a different path myself. So people don't realize that relationship stress and distress is one of the major causes of suicide. It's not really talked about. I'm a relationship specialist. Weathering Relationships is my latest book, which goes into the breaking up of a relationship, what we go through, the trauma, etc. And then if we're going to mend the relationship with the person, get back together again, the wonderful steps we can take to make that a really strong, healthy relationship. And if we decide to move on, the 10 steps that we need to make to move on healthily and not repeat the same patterns. But people don't realize that the strength of the trauma and the isolating factor of someone that's broken up in a relationship, sometimes it can be freeing, but it's a grief cycle. It's a terrible grief cycle. So really my entry to psychology, I was actually a teacher as a young lecturer at university. I was in the Middle East and Australia. And I found I wasn't a natural teacher. There are amazing natural teachers out there. My hat's off to them because they've helped me amazingly in my life. I wasn't a natural teacher at all. And part of my extracurricular activity in Sydney, Australia, in the university, the college there, was to be pastoral care for the students. And I'd had my own challenging, traumatic childhood myself. And I thought, wow, I really kind of like this because I can see what's going on for people. I'm trying to help them, but with no training. Back then, pastoral care was zero training. So I was trying to just help people in any way I could by doing what I could. And I realized there's a big gap in my knowledge. I was stimulated and excited by this. Each person that came to me that's having trouble at the university, I found it a challenge and fascinating. I changed my career, and I told my daughter at the time, I was a single dad. I told my daughter at the time, we're going to be poor. We're going to have nothing at all. We're not going to have a salary really. We're going to have to make do. But if Daddy can help one person in this world by doing this, another 7 years of study, then it's all worth it. And that's what we did. She didn't have much choice in the matter, but she remembers all those times when we made baskets together and did all she doesn't remember me taking her to Marine World or any of those things that cost us money. She remembers the lean time, so to speak. So that was my entry into this world of psychology. And I did clinical psychology, and then I did counseling psychology. Then I did systemic psychology. And I did those because I really wanted to make sure I was equipped to help people as much as I possibly can. And systemics was the last real push for me. And I did that when I was at City University in London. And
Michael, can you explain what systemic psychology is?
systemic psychology, sorry, is family and relationship therapy. So I went into systemics, relationship and family therapy, because I realized that people can't be very well treated in isolation. We all are part of a group, we're part of a family, we're part of a work environment, etc., etc. And it really made I was weak in many ways in my work, and so by doing this, I really felt empowered, and by contextualizing and bringing my patients into the arena they had to live in was amazingly powerful, and it brought amazing results too. I really believe that if we were to look at the training of clinical and counseling psychologists and psychiatrists in the future, everyone needs to be taught systemics, family and relationship therapy, because although we're in a relationship with our work, we're not taught about relationships and the impact and what we have to do and the dynamics and the abuse and everything else. We're taught about the therapeutic relationship, but we're not taught about what people are actually experiencing and how best to help them. That's why I wrote the book, Weathering Relationships, not just for people out there on the street trying to navigate their own relationship problems, but for clinicians to learn more about what is the context of a trauma, what kind of grief does somebody go through. When someone dies, they die. When someone breaks up with you, they've got agency still. I mean, if you had somebody coming back from the dead and challenging your children or messing with money or doing or even abusing you further, there'd be outcry. Well, this happens in real life. We lose a relationship and someone still has agency to really interfere with our lives. And that's different to grief from death. Grief from death is serious, it's horrible, it's nasty, we have to get over it. But the grief from a relationship breakup is much more severe in many ways because the other person has agency. So that's my journey to here. But the big thing is this is suicide discussion, and people don't realize that many people, especially men, kill themselves when relationship fails or when there's challenges in a relationship. Many people hide behind guilt or shame from a relationship breakup or trouble. Guilt and shame are the main triggers for suicide in the world. And I see you nodding your head, Diane. You know this is fact. I just wish we could get this across to politicians and Hollywood, because when I was being abused myself in my relationships, I went from a very, very abusive childhood. And don't forget, I'm pretty well healed and educated, etc. I still repeated my childhood patterns throughout my whole adult life until recently with abusive relationships. So it took me that long to realize I was repeating the pattern. I was attracting it. And yes, I'm a survivor of, and also a person that has attempted suicide myself. And I'm not hiding behind the shame anymore. You know, I'm in my early 60s and I want to make my experiences help other people. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
When you say guilt and shame, can you elaborate a bit? Like go into detail about what we're talking about
Oh,
here.
yes. When we're kind people, if we're a narcissist or sociopath or somebody that's greedy or manipulative or hateful, then no, guilt doesn't really factor. But for most abusees or codependents, people that are in a situation where they rely upon the other person, whether their day goes well or not so well, basically guilt is a very traumatic thing. We actually self-combust in a way because we can't manage the guilt we're experiencing. We can't change the past, and that's part of therapy. So therapy is about, okay, that was then. If you knew then what you know now, would you have done that? No, you wouldn't. So it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them, and that abolishes guilt. Shame is what I hid behind for years. I wasn't going to tell the world or my family or friends or anybody that the charming people I was married to or dating or whatever, living with, were actually doing something very different behind closed doors. And they saw things. They saw me in hospital. They saw different things happening with me. They saw me cancelling events. They saw me isolated, but they were polite. and they thought everything was fine until they learnt the truth. And that was very difficult to come out of the curtain of shame. In fact, I prefer to kill myself than come out of the curtain of shame. And that might sound quite dramatic to you, but I'm going to be honest during this, because these are the programs, these are the podcasts that save lives. If you think about it, when we're in our secret worlds behind shame or guilt, it's easier sometimes to think, I'm going to kill myself, rather than face the embarrassment of what I've endured. Especially someone like me, who lectures worldwide in the subject, write books in the subject. And it took me sitting with a family, a patient family, talking about narcissism. And I all of a sudden, just for some reason, that moment triggered. I thought, this is me we're talking about. And then I had the strength to leave.
Can you explain the difference between shame and guilt?
Shame is an embarrassment about what you've done yourself or somebody's done to you. Guilt would be, that's a difficult one. Guilt would be more shame of what one has done themselves or not said. I still carry guilt myself for keeping things quiet, because I know that my exes went on to abuse other people, and I could have changed that by being honest. So shame would be what I don't know, help me out here, Diana, but because I'm on the spot being interviewed.
Sure. I think a difference, or a major difference, is the difference between I did and I'll put this on quotation marks, I did a bad thing, and I'm guilty over doing that behavior. And shame is, I am bad, I am worthless, right? It's totally personalizing the experience to feel humiliated, degraded. I am the terrible thing, right? Therefore, I must hide, and I'm no good.
You did very well. You did very well. There is one thing I'd add to that, though, and that is guilt's also about what we didn't do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. What is it? Sin of commission and omission.
Absolutely. So people don't realize abuse, especially parental abuse, can be what the parents didn't do as much as what they did do. And similarly in life going forward.
That whole realm of shame, I think, is so powerful, and it is it's not spoken of, which is in a way understandable and a paradox, right? Because we're ashamed to talk about shame.
Absolutely. Right? And in therapy, psychology, psychiatry, and all therapies, people aren't trained in this. And although therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, people in therapy walk towards the fires, we're not trained to be cognizant, aware of this link. So people don't look for
it. Upcoming in February, I and two colleagues, a animator, Lucia Martinez Rojas, and a poet, Starlet Swan, the three of us are giving a presentation to the Telehealth Certification Institute, and the title is Silent Shame and Stigma, Expressive Arts and Suicide Prevention. So I've been doing a lot of reading on all those topics, and there's an article right now on my desk that I'm going to be reading. It was referenced in another article as a seminal article, and it's about shame also in the medical encounter. Yes. And the whole idea of shame too is there can be the shame of I don't feel well, like I'm not well, right? Then there's the shame of I can't seek treatment because I'm ashamed of what I'm experiencing, right? So I'm not reaching out for help. Or if I am reaching out for help, I'm not, because of my shame, I am not talking about what's really going on. And then there's the shame that interferes with actual keeping of appointments and letting people know exactly what is going on. So shame it's like a dark cloud, right? And that's not even strong enough to describe it. And when you think about it, people kill themselves over feeling shamed.
Yes. Yes. And the other thing is, which links in beautifully to this, is Roth and Fonagy, who are my gurus for clinical practice. They state that we cannot stay in the patient's story because people kill themselves. So if somebody comes to you in a therapeutic environment, starts to, or friendship basis or a family, and they start talking about the treachery and the dread, yes, we can support them by listening. But also, if we stay with their story, they can end up killing themselves because they leave even more hopeless. So we have to challenge their story. And the biggest thing a human does is we're not honest with ourselves. We're a strange breed of humanism in this world. We lie to ourselves. We twist the truth. We get deranged. So the biggest thing we can do as a family, friend, therapist, or a lover or a parent is start being Socratic and start asking questions of the person and start challenging things. Everything is black and doomy, so you've got nothing to live for. There's not one thing you'd like to do before you pull the plug. That's what we have to do to bring hope back into somebody. Start looking at what is the essence of your life? What do you need to be doing? And if anyone's listening to this and they're contemplating suicide, etc., you really need to look in the mirror and say, what are my other choices? What could I do differently to what I'm doing now? Doesn't matter what corner you're in, that corner be dark, you could actually walk away from it. And that's very important to understand. But you're spot on, Diane, with that, because we can't stay with someone in their story. We have to challenge the story. It's very important. But most therapies, most provisional training in therapy now is all person-centered, which is sitting with the person's story. And that can be very dangerous.
I'm thinking, and I don't know who originated this acronym, but the word hope can also be thought of as H for hold, O for on. Hold on, P for pain, E for ends. Hold on, pain ends. So it's so important to be able to not act on that suicidal thought, right? And in some reading that I've done, there have been research studies showing that it can take less than 30 minutes, also, and even less than 10 minutes to go from a suicidal thought to a suicidal action. So that holding on process, we talk about prevention, and there's a more global prevention effort, and then there's the very much acute prevention effort of when that person is in a suicidal state of mind. Whom can they turn to, right? And also, what you're saying is how can I challenge my thinking, right? Not to act on it.
It's a war. It's a war. And I've stated this many, many times in my career. Suicide is a war. It's more people die of suicide and are maimed from suicide attempts than any war in the world. Any war. And the one problem we have is that suicide is protected to a degree with the press because of copycat suicide issues. But we never ask the question, why did someone try and kill themselves, or why did someone kill themselves? And so many times I see in the press, the media, oh, this person was so lovely. They had everything going well for them. We don't understand why they've killed themselves. They were just engaged. Well, you didn't ask whether the person they're engaged to has just had an affair and broke their heart. You haven't asked them, oh, were they worried about their penis size? You haven't asked them, is there some kind of issue like a comorbidity, like an eating? What's going on with this person? Why did we need to understand the why to help this? Like any disease, any etiology, we have to ask questions and understand Why does someone do that? And then we can start to tackle how can we answer the questions they're asking, because it's all about questions. We're cognitive beings. That's why I designed the SOS Deviate course that you heard about with Mental Health Academy. It's a fantastic course. People are raving about it, which is humbling for me. But the reason I designed the course was because the gatekeepers of the world for suicide, police officers, are always called to domestic violence situations. They are called to relationship, family problems, traumas, crises. And during the domestic and family violence situation comes along the suicide ideation, suicide completion. They're hand in hand. So gatekeepers of suicide, gatekeepers of domestic violence, they are just general public. They're cops, they're police, they're fire brigade, they're teachers, they're children in a family, they are friends, they are clinicians, they are GPs. All these different people are gatekeepers. No one has an idea of what to do. There's no one blanket, this is what you do if you're faced with this. Why? Why is it so disengaged across the world? And people like Diane, myself, and you, Kino, we're trying to bring together something so somebody knows what to do. Because most people with domestic and family violence, most people with suicide, they're my two areas. They do this. It's uncomfortable. But then when the press get hold of it, this shouldn't have happened. It's a tragedy. Let's blame the teachers because they were the last. No. Why did the person kill themselves?
Add to the mix too, in some circumstances related to disrupted relationships or relationship betrayal, there's homicide. One partner kills the other and then kills themselves. And sometimes they're killing the children.
I think we're the only animal or being on the planet that does this. We kill ourselves and we kill our peers. And the magic number is 7. It takes someone 7 times to leave someone. Now, me personally, I used to have my bags packed Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday most weeks. I'd pack them in the morning. Guess what I'd do? I'd unpack them before they got home, because I was trying to work out, what's the best thing I can do, and that was me, and that was in between patients. So this is a real life story. So it really is a factor that most people that access therapy even have had suicide ideation at some point. Most people access therapy when they're absolutely at the last realms of hope at all. Or maybe they come along because they're made to. Diane, why did you want me along today? What is it about me that you wanted to interview and understand more for the listeners of this? And Kino, I met you in another conference scenario recently, and I'm very impressed in how you're putting things together and trying to get a voice out there, because I think on that world conference, there was a lady that was actually in a war zone at the time. And after the discussion we had, I actually looked up the stats of that war, and they were nothing. They were minute compared to the millions and millions we lose every year. People don't realize this, but the press and governments do control us in many ways. I'm not crazy, but they do. So people don't realize that HIV and AIDS wasn't actually a gay epidemic. It was a pandemic. It was an epidemic because people said it was just with people that loved the same sex. It was a gay thing. It never moved to pandemic. Whereas most people dying from HIV and AIDS, 6, 7, 8 million a year. That's a lot. That's a lot more than COVID. They were dying because the government and the press put this one slant on this thing, saying it's an epidemic, everybody else is safe. Whereas the helplines that were on HIV and AIDS during these 80s and 90s, I was privileged to actually work as a trainer for the callers on those lines. Most of the calls came from heterosexual women. So it was not an epidemic at all. And like suicide, it's so difficult to get the government to support us. It's so difficult to get training bodies to support us. It's almost like it's going on everywhere, but no one's doing anything about it. And it really isn't. I've written to ministers and not got a response. I've written to the next minister and not got a response. And they're very nice letters saying, is there any way you could help us with this? Because we really need to get some training in, because the police are standing outside a house. They can't kick in 272,000 doors worldwide every day when they get a domestic family violence call. They can't kick in a window when they think somebody might have killed themselves and if it's all quiet. What do? They need the training. So this is wonderful. That's why I enjoy these podcasts. I enjoy the interviews. I enjoy being in the press, because I say it the way it is as a practitioner and a person in the world that's concerned about this. So, yeah, shame and guilt, but also inaction. Inaction is probably the worst thing we've got in the world right now, where people just keep on ignoring it, hoping it's going to go away. And it's not. It's not until someone in that power group experiences someone who kills themselves and actually is empathic about it, that they might then try and do something.
I'm going to defer to Kino, right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay,
Kino, you're allowed to
so,
talk.
okay, yeah, let's get into the juicy stuff about relationships. And before relationships, I'm going to add toxic relationships. So I'm going to share a true story with you guys about my own personal life, and then we can take it, from there. So this is going to be like a throwback to 2013, 2014. Okay, let's go before 2013. I was surrounded by a whole lot of toxic friends. I didn't know it at the time, but, if you ask me now, I'm going to say yes, I was surrounded by toxic friends. But as you said, well, Michael, we human, we make mistakes. It's up to us to learn from it. That's part of the journey. So being surrounded by toxic friends, I found myself in a toxic relationship. I knew it was a toxic relationship, but I still stayed in the toxic relationship for just over a year. After a year ended, things went bad, things went sour, my heart got broken. I found myself even admitted in hospital. I had an asthma attack, based on it. Afterwards, when I started reflecting on it, what did I put myself through, knowing that this was a toxic relationship, I should have just left a couple months ago. Like what you also mentioned, isn't there one thing out there that, I can live for? And that's when I started finding that in myself. What are my natural talents and skills that I have? And here we are today, I'm on a podcast with phenomenal people. So for me, when I put it down to why I kept myself in that situation and why I, probably did have suicidal thoughts. Maybe I never put much awareness to it, but I ended up having a heart attack. My body reacted, my emotions reacted. I was all over the place, ended up in hospital. But one word I can put it down today is loneliness. Many people find themselves in a lonely situation. They haven't been through like a lonely self-reflection journey by themselves, which I only started going down, after 2014, and I found myself more and more and more. Luckily, I was in my early 20s, so I was like, okay, cool, can get through this. But people find themselves in a lonely situation. That's why they move from toxic to toxic to toxic.
Yeah.
And boom, they don't have the strength within to find what am I really good at? What can I live for? And they don't. So the question, I want to push out there, firstly is like, why do we not have like that confidence or self-esteem to go down a lonely journey in life to, bring more awareness to like, why am I here and what's my purpose here? And why are we scared of loneliness from a psychological point of view?
It's interesting because unlike bereavement, there's no funeral. A funeral is a time when the community comes together, there's support, people cook, they may hug you, they may have stories, they make sure they're there. Bereavement's not that. Bereavement is a lonely, isolated situation. And unfortunately, when we are grieving, we go into a depressive state It's a temporary depressive state. But what we do is we then isolate ourselves too. We start to isolate ourselves from people. Or we can do the other thing, and that is go out there and try and fix or replace the person too quickly and start sleeping around, getting on all the toxic relationships. Well, I don't think you did, Keno. I'm not saying you slept around, but it's almost like we do one of two things. We isolate and pull back and go into our cave, or we go out there and we try and replace it. We try and, but we're not really thinking. And the biggest thing is narcissists, sociopaths, or toxic people will be looking for the vulnerable. They feed off the vulnerable. They're looking for you, Keno. So that's probably what happened with you. But with loneliness, now I love India. And India is colorful, it's dirty, it's amazing, it's smelly, it's gorgeous, it's aroma. It's the only place in the world I know of that has no loneliness. They work as a team. It's an amazing team community spirit. And we've lost that in the West. Unfortunately, it comes from industrialization in the early 1900s, late 1800s, when we started to do it. It's called the, what's it called? The eye, the panomic eye. It's the eye that they used in industry. So basically, before the industrialization, people would work at a table and they would have one supervisor at the table. And then it moved into being big factories where there were 100 people working. So what they did was they put these slots around the room, around the warehouse where everyone's working. You never knew where the supervisor was at the time. It's called the panoptic effect. That's a panoptic effect. So basically, you never know. It's an all-seeing eye. You never know where the person is. So everyone's working really hard because the supervisor could be behind that slot. If you're not working hard enough, you lose your job or you docked money. That was in the industrialization. What we did then was we moved forward into the finance world, the global economy, et cetera, and it was all about competition. It made people compete against each other, and that's what happened in COVID largely. You didn't have to go into the office, but you still had to perform, and if you didn't perform, there's a problem. But unfortunately, people's targets in performing went up and up and up, so they internalized the panoptic effect by competition. So when you're competing two people for a sales job, the one that doesn't make the target 3 times this month is out. You've created this internalized panoptical effect, the all-seeing eye. You're gauged on performance. Now, what's that have to do with what you're saying about loneliness? It creates competition. People aren't looking after each other. There's no teamwork. It's all this. It's all this pushing. And then add to that lack of communities. People had to travel to get work, that the industry changed, mining villages closed, it all changed. So what we did was we split up the villages and the communities. People had to go and travel for work. And then what we did was we put everybody in these concrete boxes. Humans are pack animals. We need to be together. And what we have now are people living in these concrete boxes called homes, isolated. Hence, there's no community. You're in a concrete box. There's little support or teamwork. Everyone's competing. And the worst people in the world, and yes, I'm going to say it, are the press and Hollywood. Because the press and Hollywood promote the competition. They promote the isolation in many ways. They don't realize they're doing it, I'm sure. But that's what happens with the advertising, the selection of stories, etc. So unfortunately, Keno, your situation is where there is no real community anymore. You are a lame duck, so you're struggling, and you've got all the wolves around that are going to start picking on you and enticing you, and that creates the loneliness. And people don't realize it takes 7 times for somebody to leave a toxic relationship, and sometimes death can seem better than leaving, because people are fearful of being lonely and isolated on their own. They don't believe after a toxic relationship that they can manage on their own, because they're drip by their abuser, that they're not going to make it. They're nothing without them. And when they do leave, the lucky number 7, sometimes the perpetrator will shoot them dead because they never thought they would leave. So they actually do kill them. Or the person leaves and they have to do a huge amount of work. But leaving a toxic relationship is one of the hardest things for an abusee to do, because an abusee is a kind, caring, thoughtful person usually. That's what makes them a codependent. And for them to give up on the hope of other and the hope of the relationship going forward is probably the toughest thing a human being can do in their lifetime, is to leave something that's familiar, they know, in order. There's nothing they're going to. They're just leaving for safety. They're leaving to find themselves again. I hope that helps. I talk a lot.
I guess for me, okay, I had the strength after coming out of hospital to say to myself, okay, Kino, you're better than this. You know, you're worth more than this. You can do something with your life alone. Now, there's side effects to that as well, which I'll also share on the podcast. But there's people, and that's majority of the people out there, especially, I mean, okay, we've just entered 2025. There was a time where, okay, the media or movies sold love. Okay. In this day and age, cheating is getting sold. You know, that's the trend now. Okay. And unfortunately, there's some people who end up on the bad end when it comes to cheating. I mean, there's another psychologist, I forgot what her name is. So, like, you know, she channels a lot on YouTube. She said that, you know, and I'm not stereotyping women, Diana, that women today don't even label cheating as cheating anymore. You know, it's not even labeled that anymore in 2024. And this is when I listened to that podcast. It's not even labeled. So, of course, now, if you are in a relationship, you don't label cheating as cheating, whether you're male or female. You know, the partner may not see it that way. You know, and that's when now things are going to start getting out of control for that person. So, yeah, you know, what do we do, you know, to address, you know, that there? Like, what can we do before it gets that far?
I think you're asking me, what can we do to... Could you ask me that question in one sentence?
So, like, going to the root of, you know, being in a toxic relationship. Okay, just to put it aside, you're in a toxic relationship, but what can I do to avoid, you know, 7 times? Why can't I do it at 2 or at 1?
Well, it's about education, and I run a world panel on the prevention of domestic and family violence. It's made up of several lawyers, judges, authors, etc., in the world. And we always come to the same thing. It's about education. We need to start the education at 5 years of age about what's acceptable in the home, not just about where I shouldn't be touched, but also what's healthy, what's acceptable, because we're not educating people about what is okay and what's not okay. And unfortunately, and this is another thing that I advocate worldwide with, is that men aren't seen as abusees in domestic violence and family violence situations very well. Most of the advertising about women, men are slowly starting to come out of the eaves now and say, well, in actual fact, it's happening to me, but the shame card is huge for men. And I'm very privileged to hear your story today, Kina, because it is a big thing to be honest and truthful with ourselves and others. But people in positions of power are actively ignoring this issue. And until that changes, we're not going to get the resources for education. People have to be told it's okay to leave. It's okay, because when you leave, we'll have this resource to help you. But also, it's the abusers. Now, people don't understand the difference usually between a sociopath, who's the big Hollywood thing where this murderous person goes around and does all these different things, and narcissism. Well, narcissism and sociopaths are the same thing, but the Freudian Analytics Society decided that you could cure sociopaths, but it's a different kind of sociopath called a narcissist. So basically, narcissism was treatable. So people started to treat narcissism. Narcissism is not treatable. It's not treatable. Same as sociopaths, not treatable. But somebody in the Analytics Society thought, do you know what, I'm going to make a name for myself, and I'm going to create this treatment for this. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You cannot treat a narcissist. You cannot treat a sociopath. It is a situation. So with that in mind, we have to educate people as to what these things are. We teach people about cooking, embroidery, Latin, French. We teach people math. We have to start teaching people about human relationships, and also why. And the most important human relationship is that one with self. And when a relationship with self goes wrong, we kill ourselves. Hey, that is that simple. It's that simple. So if you think about it, in all honesty and seriousness, we need to start teaching people about relationships. And I'm going to give you a really amazing fact right now. Most therapists, psychiatrists, and psychologists in the world are not trained in relationships. They're trained in the therapeutic relationship, but not relationships. Hence, I wrote the book, Weathering Relationships, because it's not known of, it's not easy to access. Milanian systemic therapy that I trained in, it is full of theory. And to read one page of it, you have to have 7 pages of notes. It's so dense. And that's what a lot of the field is. We need accessible material saying, this is okay, this isn't okay. If this happens more than once, we need to do this. That's your exit strategy. What do you do when a friend has marks on them? What do you do when a friend keeps on cancelling, doesn't have any money? Let's start asking questions. But also the biggest thing is a codependent, a kind, loving person in toxic relationship, a codependent, generally will give and give and give and forgive and forgive and forgive. And I always say on interviews, I'm always asked this, how do you know you're in a toxic relationship, Michael? Well, I'll tell you. If your partner drops a teacup in the kitchen and it smashes on the floor, and you run into the kitchen, you sweep up the bits of the cup and you're apologizing for them dropping it, you're in a toxic relationship.
That's a good example.
It's a really good example, isn't it? Because it really
I'm
shows.
sorry it happened. I'm sorry you dropped the cup. Okay, I get where you're going with this.
And Keita, I think you've been there because you got that immediately.
Yeah, you were the one that's always apologizing, Okay, so to answer that question, for the audience, one would be is to self-educate yourself with a podcast such as this. 2 is knowing that, okay, it's okay to walk away from a toxic relationship. Now, I mentioned before, okay, there's side effects when you come out of that sort of situation and then you decide, okay, I'm going to focus on myself now. The side effects to that, is that you end up in a situation where being alone is all you know now. And this I'm talking also from personal experience, till date. Being alone is all you know. Any relationship that I found myself in from 2014 till date has never lasted. Doesn't last because I'm so focused on myself, what I need to do for my life, what I need to do for my career, what are my goals. It's now me, 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 me. But it's not also good that way, for one person to live. And then I've evaluated for myself. But then there's also, as I said, what's trending in 2025. It's also a risk, not going into a relationship with the chance that your eyes might just close, or you're always going to be insecure about the relationship. What if this happens to me again? So not only me living through it, but of course, there's many other people living through it because they don't want to get into another relationship after that. Because what if it happens again and I lose out and I could have been doing this instead of, being in a relationship. Meanwhile, the person that you could, be with or, was with was someone who wouldn't have behaved in the manner that your partner did all those years ago. So,
you're talking about
just
a
throwing that
diamond.
out there as well.
You're talking about a diamond. And do you know what that diamond's called? Trust.
A woman's best friend. Oh.
Trust.
Yeah.
No, trust. When trust is hurt, and also don't forget, when we're in a toxic relationship, we lose trust in ourselves because we're not sure what to do anymore. So we're challenging ourselves and triple checking ourselves all the time. And if we lose trust in ourselves, we start to triple check and we're not too sure about what our next move should be. We're not too sure about this person. Was that a manipulation? That reminded me of what happened before. All these things happen. There's another factor too. In order to trust again, you simply have to trust who you're with. That's the only way to trust again, is to trust. And the biggest way to get rid of the demons that might not be there, but you think might be there, is communication. And when you communicate with a healthy person, they'll engage with you. They'll show you love. They'll show you understanding. And that key word, emotional intelligence, they'll own up to their own insecurities. They'll say, yeah, do you know what? I did shout at you last night. I'm really, really sorry about that. Some other things were going on. That's a healthy, reasonable relationship. Someone that blames you all the time, that's not. When you feel that you can't talk with somebody, that's not. When you feel like you're forever owning the problems and you could make it better, that's not. To trust again, Kino, is the gift. We are allowed to trust again. And if we trust again and it goes wrong, we'll see it the second time. We're ready to see those signs. But if we do trust someone, we have to be vulnerable with them. We have to be able to cry. And we have to be able to have the other person cry and realize it's genuine. So trusting ourselves is probably the biggest thing. Being honest with ourselves and trusting ourselves is the biggest thing we have to do after a toxic relationship. But the only way we can have a healthy relationship going forward is the leap of faith and to trust again. But to be mindful, if that trust is broken, we'll act on it.
That's
In a
the
positive
trusting
way.
ourselves part.
Yeah,
To be
and I'm feeling
to
quickly
be
just
true to
talk.
ourselves.
Yeah, to be true to ourselves and trust ourselves. And it is shaky. It's shaky ground. I mean, imagine the old fable of putting your hand in the lion's mouth and you're bitten and you're bitten. And then the third time you're going to put your hand in the lion's mouth. That's faith, but it's not going to bite you. And that's what you have to do. And if it bites you, 3 strikes, you're out.
Michael, you've mentioned a number of times about in a type of abusive relationship, the one who is being, in quotes, victimized, they're going to need to wake up to what's happening and leave, right? What about a situation, and I can speak from my own experience, this wasn't an abusive relationship, someone that I was deeply in love with, and he suddenly decided that for various reasons, some of them might have been good reasons, that this relationship was not for him, the one that he was having with me. And he suddenly left, absolutely gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And I can remember the emotional feeling I had. I literally felt like the sun had gone out. It was just devastating. And thankfully, I like to write poetry, so I could pour these emotions into writing and to get some of these feelings out. But it was a tremendous loss, and and I would even use the word devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are other people who have experienced this, and it could trigger, I give up, right? I can't even trust love anymore.
Yeah.
Right? I can't trust myself because why didn't I see that this could have happened, even though potentially you couldn't see it happen? And it could trigger wanting to kill oneself.
Yes, yes.
Like,
very
I'm done with this, right?
Well, you had somebody you loved and trusted make an autonomous decision and leave. And by making a decision without involving you to try and fix it or discuss it or move through it, they put up a wall. And so they took all your power. All your power went out the window. You had no way of rescuing, managing, doing anything. It came from far, right, right out of it. It was just a shock, a trauma. And people don't realize that the most important thing is to breathe and drink water, because it is a trauma and the body reacts to that trauma. But he closed the door. He closed the door without warning, without discussion. And humans like to reason through trauma. May I ask you a question, Diana? Did he actually talk to you after closing the door, or did he just go away, or did you not feel able to talk with him?
He never spoke to me again.
I'm sorry, but that sounds like a sociopath. It just
And there was no, there was, you know what I mean? There was no arguments, problems, right? There was only connection and love and physical intimacy in our relationship. And like a bomb going off, he decided that, and I'm not going to go into personal details, because part of me can understand what was going on.
There's a Hollywood movie. You won't have me talk very favorably about some Hollywood things, but this film was fantastic. And it was a film about a man. I can't remember the name of the movie, but maybe you'll know it. It's a movie about a woman with her children in the house. And one day her husband walked out with a dog and never came back. And it's all the emotions, the thoughts, the trauma she went through. And it wasn't until 20 odd years later they found that he'd gone down a well in the wood and died. He didn't leave her. And the healing that came from, I just felt goosebumps go all the way through me. It does it every time. But the healing she got from understanding why he didn't come back was the key to her recovery. But she couldn't date. She couldn't trust anybody else anymore. It was just, it was the whole movie was about trying to reason it out. And that's exactly what we're talking about with you, Diane. Okay, we might find him down a well. I'm sorry for saying
I don't think so.
I kind of would like to find him down the well after doing that to you. But the thing is, it is an unexplained exit. It's a death that was, it's called complicated grief, because it's death was unexpected. There's no negotiation, and the person has agency out there. So they're actually saying, I'm rejecting you. You're not good enough. For some reason, you're not good enough. We're not even going to discuss it. I'm gone. So they're leaving you, the same with this movie. I wish I could remember the name of it. All the trauma, all the guessing.
I think what you said, Michael, about acknowledging personhood of the other individual, that a person has a right to make their own choices in life, but they also, I feel, in a humane way, have a responsibility to share with the other person, what they're doing, right? And why, and in certain circumstances, to acknowledge the pain that you're causing the other person. You may not want to cause the other person pain, but to acknowledge that and to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this is happening. I wish it could be different. But for my reasons, I can't, and it can't change. And this is terrible. And I'm sorry. I wish you the best.
And it's nothing to do with you. It's to do with me. because unfortunately they leave you with that looking at the mirror. Well, what is it about me that's wrong?
Hmm.
And again,
And as I said
trust.
before, and I'm sort of almost reliving it now, that metaphor I gave, the thing about the sun going out, I absolutely was thinking that and feeling that way. It felt, metaphorically speaking, and maybe it's not only a metaphor, that it was like plunged in darkness, that someone is shining the light, right? But then it gets into other elements of why, why was I needing that light to shine on
No,
me?
no, 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 no,
What
no.
was going on also inside of me,
Well, let's go into as a psychiatrist, you'll understand this. Let's go into cellular biology. When we have a massive trauma, what happens to the brain? It shuts down to protect us, right? That's the sun going. So
That's
really,
like blacking out, literally.
yeah, that's basically what happened with you. Is you had a chemical reaction in the brain to say, boom, gone. And it's a protective thing, but unfortunately, in our society now, we don't have the fight or flight. It used to be that we'd lose something, we'd have to fight or run or do something. Adrenaline would kick in, it would change the chemistry in the brain again. That doesn't happen in the 21st century, 2025. When a trauma happens, we're sitting there with it. So that the brain does all this chemical change, and the only way we can get rid of that is exercise, routine, healthy eating, stay away from drugs and alcohol. That's the only way we can get the brain back into function. And we know that in the field, and that's what we try and do with CBT, is get somebody back into a functioning mode. But the sun going out is correct, because if you get rid of the endorphin and all the changes, it's a blanket, and it's just dark. It is a dark feeling. It's a black.
I wish that I could remember this gentleman's name, so I'm apologizing for not remembering his name. But there is in London, I believe, there was a drag queen who was going by the name of Vivian. And I think it was Vivian, like Vivian Westwood, right?
Yes,
the designer,
yes.
for fashion. So this gentleman was calling himself Vivian. So he had won RuPaul's fashion drag queen show, and he died by suicide recently.
Yes.
And I saw it on the news, and I was looking him up. He was tremendously talented, so witty, so intelligent. Just tremendous life in him, although he also talked about difficulties he had in the past. I don't know if you can share any thoughts about him, or what you've read in the news about him, because again, one of those situations where he was, I don't know, was he about to move into a new home, or something new was happening? He was very successful in his career. He was beloved in his community. It seemed to have a good relationship with his parents. And this was a shock apparently to everyone.
In answer to that is, when someone dies, as in the wise words of William Worden, the grief expert, attachment expert, is that successful grief is learning to live without the answers. And with suicide, we generally don't have the answers. And you're asking me, what are your ideas about? I don't have the answers. If I'm going to be an expert witness right here now, I'd say I've got no clue. Vivian died with those answers. We don't know. However, when I hear of someone killing themselves, murdering themselves, which it is, I do, and I think after 30 odd years of working as a specialist in family trauma, I've seen and heard and worked with some things you'd never ever want to even read about in the press. It's been a long journey in my career. I've had excellent supervision the whole way, which has actually got me through it. And I think if there's any clinicians, etc., here listening to this, you have to have effective, solid supervision when you're in this field. But I go over to my spiritual self. I was very much a very strong Roman Catholic as a child. I left the faith. I didn't leave the Bible behind me. I've taken many good lessons from the Bible with me through life. But spiritually, I believe there's a higher power. I'm a kind and thoughtful person. But mostly I believe that life does unfold as it's meant to. And I think when our time to expire, for whatever reason, in whichever way happens, and we are left without so many answers to questions we have. And I think in situations like this, Diane, we have to consider wishing them a peaceful passing and to help the people that are damaged and hurt from the passing. And that's all we can do until it's our own time to pass. I've just finished reading an old book, but it's a wonderful book called The Monk That Sold His Ferrari. And it's a book about life lessons. And it was a reminder. I always get reminded about...
That was Robin Sharma.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, Robin Sharma.
And I always get reminded of things in life. And the reminder at the end of that book was that we're spiritual beings inhabiting a human body for a short period of time. We're not humans. So I think with that, we pass on. I don't know what happens to us. All the dead people do know what happens to us. They die knowing the answer. But with Vivian and anybody that kills themselves, murders themselves, the one wish I have is that it's probably the most lonely thing a person can do in their lives, especially Kino listening to you about the fear of loneliness. And at that time of loneliness, I wish I could personally hold the hand of everyone who's dying from suicide, because that's the time when they most need their hand held.
What would you want to say? I know the friends, family, the community that Vivian was in, because potentially there are people who knew and loved Vivian who might be thinking, if Vivian did this to themselves, maybe I should too.
I've got no answer for copycat or that type of suicide. The only thing I wish we would do is I've recently engaged in a further study in the grief cycle, and a lot of people are responding to that. I wish we could do a worldwide study just saying, if anyone kills themselves, if anyone has any information anonymously, just write to this email address, where we can set up a meta-analysis tool to say, okay, that person, okay, so there's a percentage of people that kill themselves because this reason, or everyone please leave a note. Just let us know the truth of why you are expiring, why you're murdering yourself, because it will help us. Because some people that die, I worked in chronic pain management and disability in a hospital for the first 10 years of my career. And some people that survived RTAs, road traffic accidents, or suicide attempts that went tragically wrong, etc., where they've got no arms, no legs, they've lost half their face, whatever's happened to them. They wanted to die and they didn't have the means to die, and death would bring them peace. And I could understand where they're at. And so I think sometimes murdering ourselves can be very peaceful. But a lot of people that murder themselves don't see there's an amazing life to live further. But then if we do think about faith, we do think about spirituality, and someone does kill themselves, we just have to learn to live without the answers and wish them all the best. And that was their time. And losing someone through suicide, and it's happened to me in my practice, in my personal life, we are left with what could we have done to have changed this? What could we have done differently? What could we have said? And really, my survival tactic at that point is it's done. We cannot change what's happened. We can learn from it, and we can wish them Godspeed.
Yep. That's all we can do.
Yeah, nodding my head and taking in what you're
That's all we
saying,
can do.
Michael.
I would like to hug both of you right now because I think that this is a very emotional podcast, and I think we're involved in it. If we help one person from this in some way, it's worth all of our effort and energy. And I think it is the collective kindness of people, how we reach out. Kina, thank you so much for this today. I think you're amazing to go through your own trauma, both physical and emotional, and something like this come out of it. That's just commendable. And Diane, you and I, we've had these careers in mental health, and we're still paying forward because some people say, well, why'd you do that job? It's not for the money. This is for the soul. We do this job for the soul. So sometimes we just need to do more hugging as well. Just kind hugging.
Well, if you really look at
Not
it,
to be ashamed to hug, right? Or to
all of
say,
us have some
I need a
trauma,
hug.
some form of trauma that we've come in with. Now, to be on a podcast, you need to be an expert at something, but sometimes that expertise comes from experience. We've been through something, we know how we've dealt with it. Of course, now what I've learned from you in my own personal life with the side effects. I can apply that. For people who are still stuck in a toxic relationship and have no way out, they know now, okay, it's okay to leave, bring a self-awareness to that. Now you know that.
Okay to leave safely when it's safe. And that's a very key point, when it's safe.
When it's safe. It's easier in 2025 than 2013, 2014, or even before that. But, we still find ourselves in toxic relationships anyway, from what I've gathered, on the streets. The divorce rate, like in South Africa specifically, is on a rise. People get, married today, we have this fairy tale wedding. 6 months down the line, there's a kid involved, we're getting a divorce. Now the kid has to grow up with unnecessary trauma based on decisions that the parents have made. It's extremely complex, extremely complex. If I'm a mother, I'm going to stay in an abusive relationship because of my kids' sake. I'm going to take all the abuse, and then that's going to create even further suicidal thoughts as a mother or as a father. It's extremely complex topic, or field of expertise that you are in, when it comes to psychology.
I think of myself as soul work. It's just trying to choose the battles and trying to do as much as we can in order to help the ship steer in a better direction. We can't solve things. We can just do our best to pay forward and help them a little bit better.
Michael, before when you and Kina were speaking, and you had mentioned, of course, when it's safe to leave, right? But I was also thinking that in abusive relationships, that the leaving of the partner can increase the danger towards the partner.
Yes.
Which could become violent, right, and homicidal. When also I'm thinking also in relationships where I think the woman becomes pregnant, that there can be a increased risk of violence towards the woman during the pregnancy itself, right? That increases the risk factor. But be that as it may, let's say someone is contemplating leaving. Are there certain resources that you would recommend, the person have at hand, either a box of belongings that they need to go with, or other agencies?
I think you did my course, Diane. In
Yes.
SOS DV8, I always talk about the safe time to leave, but also to have a grab bag. Now, I'm a boater, and on a boat, you always have a waterproof bag, and in that bag is your passport, keys, some money, just certain things in there. So if the boat goes down, you grab it. So that's why it's called a grab bag. It's waterproof. You can keep yourself buoyant with it. It's enough to get to safety. And the same at home. So basically, if you're in a domestic violence situation, have a grab bag somewhere hidden. Make sure it has maybe a phone that you keep charged, a second phone. There are separate numbers. You can call somebody. Maybe a pen and a piece of paper so you can write an emergency note. So this is not me being dramatic. This is what I've worked with for 30 odd years and happens every day, every minute. So maybe a pen and paper you can write something on as a help me if you can't speak. To have some cash, doesn't matter how much it is, it might just be enough to be able to pay somebody £1 or $1 or whatever and say, I need to use your phone. Here's the money. I'm in trouble. Please let me use your phone. It could be a train ticket, a bus ticket. It could be your identity documents, your driving license, your passport, anything so you can grab it and go and you'll be okay. Now, if you have children, it's more difficult to move the children and you. And whether you're a man or a woman, don't forget this is not about gender. Men and women are equally abused. Women can be more violently abused by the strength of a man, but it actually happens the other way around too. So there's no gender involved.
Yeah.
Men or women, if you're in a domestic violence situation, you have to have your grab bag ready. Secondly, if you feel it's getting worse and you have some warning, tell someone. Just tell somebody that I'm going to be leaving. I might need your help. Or can you make sure that you're following them to make sure where they are so I'm safe, I can go the other way. Just find a resource. Now, where you are, if you're listening to this, you'll have local resources for safe houses. Unfortunately, less for men than women, but there are usually free telephone numbers, or if you can Google, if you've got access to a computer, Google. Now, if you do Google these things to get in preparation, make sure you do it on a secret private browser, because your person that's abusing you might look at the history and know your plan. So basically you have to be really, really careful, like a detective on a show. You'll make sure everything's covered. Find out where they are. Keep that in your grab bag. Maybe if you've got somebody you trust, be careful about who you trust, because sometimes people don't believe an abusee. They believe that the person that's charming, etc., could never do that. They might think you're exaggerating. They might not help you. They might actually go to your abuser and say, I think they've got a screw loose because they're planning on leaving you and doing this. And people don't realize that this goes on, but what goes on behind closed doors is amazing, especially if you've been covering your cigarette burns, your bruises, or the fact that money's been taken. Whatever the abuse is, emotional abuse, whatever it is, you have to make sure you prepare really carefully. Have your grab bag. If there is somebody you can trust, let them know. Even an agency, you might say, things are getting worse. I'm going back because my child's there, or I'm going back because I've got nowhere else to go. Can you just take my name and address, and if you haven't heard from me again within 24 hours, can you please send just anything? You have to really prepare for these things. You have to find out where you can go. Where's a safe place to go? Where would they think I'd go if I were leaving? Where else could I go alternatively? And then the hard work starts, because staying left is the most difficult thing, because it's scary. It's weird. I mean, if you're thinking of sleeping in your own bed and all of a sudden you're sleeping on someone's sofa, you're annoying the heck out of the family you're staying with. If you're lucky enough to have that, you might be in a shelter. And all of a sudden being back there in the familiar, abusive environment might feel better than being lonely or hungry or uncomfortable where you are. So the biggest thing is staying left and remembering why you're left. And that's where therapy comes in handy. And don't forget, you don't have to afford therapy. A lot of these agencies now will actually offer you free therapy for your staying left and your recovery, it's tough. It's one of the toughest counterintuitive things a caring human can do. And it's usually caring, kind humans that are abused. So if you bear that in all of the mix, a grab bag, and listen, if you're a clinician or a therapist listening to this, go to Mental Health Academy and look up my SOS DV8 course. It is every bit of experience I've been able to put in to help people. If you've got a friend or a family member or somebody you're worried about, ask them questions. Just start being Socratic. Ask them questions about how you're doing. You haven't been kind of yourself recently. You know, what's happening with it? You just start and start giving them an idea of supporting them. And I'm not promoting my book. I wrote this book in order to help people. Same as I said to my daughter years ago, if we can help one person, that's great. Fortunately, we're helping thousands. But Weathering Relationships is a very good resource for understanding if you're in a bad relationship, what you should do either to move on safely and permanently, or if you do make up with the person, they're going to change, how you can do that healthily with a new set of rules. If you are in a toxic, traumatic, narcissistic type of relationship, learning how to leave will help you prepare to leave. But of course, it's titled Learning How to Leave. Do not buy it and put it on the coffee table. You have to be very, very sneaky with these things. So put it under a tree, or maybe get the Kindle or get the Audible or something. Be smart. If you're thinking you need to leave, you have to be safe when you leave. But most of all, if you're going to leave permanently, because if you leave and go back, it will get worse. Hopefully that's helpful.
I'm feeling so much from what you've been sharing, Michael, and want to thank you for that. That it's so important, that element of education. What is abuse, right? Put it like, what is abuse? And then an educational understanding of within your family setting, you know, within peer bullying, work, relationships, but what makes up abuse, right? And then the key factor would be, I don't deserve to be abused, right? To remember that. And then what do I do, right? If it comes to the fact that I am being abused.
And a key question to ask ourselves, whether we're in a toxic, abusive relationship, is if it feels unreasonable and seems unreasonable, then it usually is unreasonable. I hope I've helped you guys. I hope I've helped you out there.
Yeah, you covered a lot of
and that
points.
idea too of, and that I don't have to kill myself to get out of this situation, that I can get out of this situation and live and have a better life.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much,
Dr.
Michael Acton.
Can I just quote one more thing for the listeners of what Michael just said? If you go back, it's going to get worse, because a lot of people go back. It's a trend. We leave, we say we're leaving, you know, couple months, we go back. We fall for, there's a specific word I want to use. I'm not going to use that word. I'm just going to use the word nonsense. We fall for the same nonsense again. Okay. We go back, it happens again. You know, stop being so stubborn. You know, listeners, stop being so stubborn. Leave, never look back. You can do it.
But do it safely.
Yeah, do it safely. Do it safely. It reminds me of another movie with Jennifer Lopez called Enough. Not sure if you guys watched it. So it's also, you know, she was in an abusive relationship. And, you know, one night she decided to get up. She had one of those bags and she left. And then she started learning mixed martial arts because, you know, she was anxious. He's going to find me. And he did end up finding her, but he was in for a surprise. You know, it's not the same person that left him, you know. So.
Well, that works in Hollywood. do not take a leaf out of her book, please.
Physical abuse is happening in your household, safely go and learn kung fu or mixed martial arts or karate, Do
Yeah.
something to protect yourself.
I was thinking about the idea of, like, I believe in the relationship versus I believe in myself. Okay. And I'd ask your thought on that, Michael, but when it's tipping in, I believe in the relationship becomes more powerful, that myself is getting lost, right? Like the relationship becomes more important and more valuable than my own self experience.
I hear what
then we're in
saying.
trouble.
That gets very tangled. And what I always do with people that come to see me for work is I tell them, in a relationship, we are committed to the commitment, not the relationship. So we're committed to the commitment. So when we have a commitment with each other, there are rules and boundaries. If we're committed to the relationship, it's whatever organic thing that is. But when we get married, when we decide to live with somebody, when we decide to stay with somebody, it's a commitment. And that commitment needs to be written out and worked on. That's why the making up part of Weathering Relationships, my book, that's what gives you the stages, the 10 stages to make that a healthy reunion or union. You should never marry someone or live with them without deal breakers, boundaries, what's acceptable, what are the 3 strikes you're out, what do we want to plan for, what are our goals, what are our dreams. All those things are part of that. Being committed to the commitment, being committed to that with the trust, not the relationship.
It's a make your romance rational, right? That there's a contract involved.
There is. It's a negotiation, yeah.
Yeah. That
Thank
just
you
reminds me of what
again,
I see
Michael.
to like independent artists, when they come see me and, they're in a relationship or the relationship is still in its early phases. I'm like, this is the time now where you actually need to be open with your partner about what your goals are of being an
Transparent.
artist. Be transparent, because there's going to be certain, expectations, coming from the opposite end. But you need to be clear to say, okay, look, this is not going to be an average 8 or 9 to 5 job. There's going to be certain sacrifices I'm going to need to make over the next few years, not months, years. Are you willing to be with me on this journey? Be open about it. And if he or she says, okay, I'm not willing, I want someone that's going to be around all the time, okay, that's a red flag. It's time, go your separate ways. But once again, I find myself surrounded by artists who don't listen. And a couple months down the line, it just blows up. The relationship blows up, their careers blow up before it even got started. And they just find themselves in another toxic relationship. True story here, another toxic relationship, and no direction whatsoever.
Well, we have to have them listen to this
So
podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it,
Now, I have a boundary, because in 2 minutes' time, I might be facing a divorce because I'm supposed to be going out and I've got 2 minutes to
Okay.
get myself ready. So I'm sorry about that. But Kino and Diane, I think you're amazing people. Thank you so much for inviting me and helping me with getting my message across to people about how to be safe, how to have other thoughts than to murder yourself. And maybe somebody's picked up something about a healthy relationship or how to leave, but it's people like you we need in power to really help us get the message across and educate people that it can be different and we can be different. But also, I think, commit to a commitment, not a dynamic. It doesn't work. It never works. Thank you so much. I've got to run.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the kind
Bye,
words. And thank you
Michael.
for coming on.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
No,
Hey. Okay, you still
I don't,
recording.
did I?